Well, good afternoon. This is the Law and Crime Network. As you know, I'm Linda Kenny Bodden, and we have a full plate today. Okay, so that's the prosecution's motive and the .32 caliber. So let me discuss with my guests. First, let me bring in, well, one of my favorites. We met first time personally about a month ago in person before he came on the show. She is a DA. In New Jersey, we call you guys prosecutors. And this is Bernarda Villalona.
Nice to have you.
Nice to have you back. And a former prosecutor, former DA, I guess you'd call yourself again, but now defense attorney, major medical malpractice expert, major attorney, and that is Jason Friedman. Jason, so nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, so I got to have you put your hats on. Sometimes hats you don't like, but Bernarda, you're the prosecutor right now. Okay, this prosecutor, Mr. Fuchs, said that Mr. Segura has a motive. He said he was there the day of, he puts himself there the day of the crime, right before, as a matter of fact, within the hour before supposedly the crime occurred, and that he also owned a .32 caliber. Tell me from a prosecution point of view, are these good facts, bad facts, or irrelevant facts?
Well, I don't really like the motive itself, but I do like the means, how he discussed that this defendant, Segura, did have a .32 caliber handgun, a revolver, which was actually used in this case. He also presented to the jury that prior to this homicide happening, that Segura asked his friend, can he borrow a gun? But being that the friend said no, he had to use his own .32 caliber handgun for this execution. I didn't really like the motive because $20,000 to me doesn't seem like enough of pressure for you to kill 4 people. But then again, people have been killed for much less.
So Jason, we're going to go to the defense closing in a bit, but let me just talk to you about this. When Mr. Fuchs gets up there and talks to the jury, this jury has heard a lot about how there's no DNA, right? They've heard a lot about how the DNA doesn't match. They've heard a lot about, wait, maybe the prosecution was buying a witness to come in and say there may be one little marker of DNA, which we'll discuss again in depth later on. But I really had some issues if I were on the jury with the prosecution closing. Tell me, reading my mind, what those issues could be.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we call grasping at straws if you're a defense attorney. And I'm sure this defense attorney is going to get up and argue very vigorously about the lack of really good, solid, credible evidence. Mr. Fuchs is trying to do his best and paint a picture to try to strain credibility, to say, come on, it has to be him. Look at all these little things. They add up to the big thing, namely the homicides. But the evidence, I think it's a little thin. It's going to be really interesting to see how the defense handles that on their closing argument.
Well, speaking of how the defense handles it, as we know, this is a retrial because the jury was hung 8-4 in the first trial for not guilty. But Mr. Prince, Nate Prince, was very animated. He's the defense attorney for Henry Segura. Let's listen to him on motive. Well, that is a defense attorney that I would like to take a lecture from, Nathan Prince, who we just looked him up, by the way, on the internet, which you can do too. He was formerly a state's attorney. He was also in the criminal appeals division. Nathan, Nate Prince is his name. He goes by Nate. Jason, he had a theory here that when he discussed to the jury reasonable doubt, he didn't say, oh, you got to prove beyond reasonable doubt, but he said not only have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, then they have to disprove all the facts I brought forward, or else that doubt is always there. Tell me about this.
Right. Did you notice how methodical he was, though? He was really going, I know he was talking about the motive piece there, but he was really the alleged motives. He was really going, piece by piece to try to refute each and every one of them. And that dovetails into, obviously, his reasonable doubt. He started out by talking about how motive is not an element of a case, but he understands that a jury is going to latch onto that. And if they're convinced of the motive, or conversely, convinced there is not a sufficient motive, obviously it's going to help his client. So,
Bernarda, he said something, and I wrote it down earlier because when I was waiting. It's evidence of a man who has waited for you for too long, when he talks about how the defendant testified. But one of the things that was a consistent theme is that you, the jury, you have to look at all this, and you really have to find your way beyond, shall we say, the horse's doo-doo.
I mean, one thing that I like that this defense attorney did is that in discussing Segura's demeanor on the stand, because we have to admit that.
And we're going to get to seeing his
Yeah,
demeanor.
his demeanor on the stand was really rambunctious. Like, he was really a little bit out of control and disrespectful to the court as well as to anybody that was in the courtroom. But what he did, this defense attorney, is that he twisted it and said, this man has been in jail for so many years. He is upset. He has a right to be mad.
Right.
He is innocent. So it does make sense that he will be upset like this because you're the reason that he's still in jail.
So Jason, all right, so you're an attorney, right? I always tell attorneys they have to be willing to go to jail when the judge is at them, to really represent their client well. They have to go back at that judge. And most attorneys don't have the gumption that we saw here in this courtroom, even from Mr. Prince, who really just went back at would be the charges that the judge is going to give those jury. So if you were now Nathan Prince, you're sitting there and you're waiting with your client, what do you tell him?
Oh, I tell him that this is good. This is a good thing. I'm pushing back on the judge. Everything is going well on that. You have to remember that he is performing in a way for the jury. And by going back at the judge in the way he did, I think he's showing the jury just how passionate he is about the case. You notice the difference between Mr. Fuchs and Mr. Prince, and just in terms of the way they delivered their closing argument. I really feel the passion goes a long way, and the jury picks up on that. And by doing what he did, by pushing back on the judge the way he did, it was almost a performance for the jury, I think.
Well, very interesting, because Nathan Prince also was able to deal with forensic evidence. And when we come back, we're going to talk about one specific blood drop. Stay tuned.